walked out of a movie theater, especially in the middle of like a random Tuesday afternoon, and experienced that bizarre physical moment of total disorientation?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's like your brain short circuits for a second.
Right. You push open those heavy, soundproof doors, you step off that sticky carpet, and suddenly you're just blinking against this blinding, aggressive sunlight.
It's awful. You feel completely exposed.
Exactly. And for a split second, just a very brief, visceral, almost dizzying split second, the bright, chaotic street in front of you actually feels less real than the dark, manufactured world you just spent 2 hours sitting in.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's a very specific, almost physiological kind of vertigo.
It really is. For just a moment, you feel like the real world is the illusion and the film was the reality.
You literally have to wait for your brain to, recalibrate its frequency to actual reality.
Yeah.
It's like waking up from a dream that was so vivid, the waking world just feels dull and unconvincing by comparison.
And, I mean, most of the time, we just shake it off. We blink a few times, grab our car keys, and get back to our lives. But today, we are going to freeze that exact split second of vertigo and just live inside it for a while.
I love that. Let's do it.
Because today's stack of sources, which, by the way, is an incredibly dense, fascinating collection of notes bridging classical philosophy, psychoanalysis, and postmodern cinematic theory, it suggests that this momentary disorientation isn't just an accident.
Right. It's not just a quirk of lighting.
Exactly. It is a highly engineered feature of modern media. So our mission for this deep dive is to explore how postmodern movies essentially hack your perception of reality.
Which is a bold claim, but the sources really back it up.
They really do. We want to figure out if you, the viewer, sitting in the dark with your popcorn, are just a passive consumer absorbing moving images, or if you are actually an active, crucial creator of the cinematic experience itself.
What's fascinating here is that to answer that, we have to look way beyond just the mechanics of filmmaking. I mean, we are talking about the very fabric of how we understand existence in the modern world.
That's a huge scope.
It is, yeah. Cinema in this context isn't just entertainment. It's a laboratory. It's the physical space where we can see massive, abstract, philosophical shifts happening in real time, right in front of our eyes.
Which makes it the perfect subject for a deep dive.
Definitely. But to understand how postmodern films actively bend your reality, we first have to ground ourselves in what reality even used to mean, both in art and in society.
Let's start right there, because the sources place a massive emphasis on this historical shift from modernism to postmodernism. And I'll be honest, postmodernism is one of those terms that gets thrown around so much in art classes and cultural critiques that it almost loses its meaning.
Oh, totally. It becomes this buzzword for anything weird or confusing.
Right. The text defines it as a cultural movement that actively rejects and undermines the foundational assumptions of the modernist era specifically, the ideas of universal truth and rationality. But when we strip away the academic jargon, how does that actually play out in how we view the world?
Well, the easiest way to grasp it is through something called the rejection of the meta-narrative.
The meta-narrative. Okay, break that down for me.
So throughout almost all of human history, societies have held themselves together using these meta-narratives. They're basically the grand, overarching stories we tell ourselves to explain how the world works.
Like the big operating systems for a culture.
Exactly. They give our chaotic past a cohesive structure, and they give our future a distinct meaning and purpose.
So we're talking about the big cultural pillars, like the idea that scientific progress will inevitably cure all human suffering, or the overarching salvation narratives of major world religions.
Yes, or even the political concept that history is just this steady march toward ultimate democratic freedom. All of those are meta-narratives.
Okay, that makes sense.
And they function perfectly for a very long time because they offered a comforting, warm blanket of absolute truth. If you live within one of those narratives, you knew your place in the universe.
Right, there were rules. There was a clear path.
But then postmodernism looks at the 20th century, and it looks specifically at the unprecedented devastation of 2 world wars, the horror of the Holocaust, the existential dread of the nuclear bomb, massive social upheavals, and it concludes, well, none of these grand stories can possibly be true for everyone.
Wow. Yeah, it's hard to hold on to a comforting story after all that.
Exactly. Postmodernism looks at the wreckage of the 20th century and argues that there is no single objective truth holding the universe together.
The center cannot hold, as they say.
Precisely. Instead of one unifying truth, postmodernism says there is only pluralism. There's a fractured multiplicity of voices, highly subjective experiences and competing realities.
So it's a worldview where the core unifying meaning has completely evaporated.
Yeah, pretty much.
Which honestly sounds incredibly isolating. But this is where the sources make a brilliant connection to film, because reading about the collapse of universal truth in a philosophy textbook is one thing, but experiencing it is another.
Right, and cinema is uniquely positioned to capture this postmodern dread.
Exactly. It's a pre-verbal, direct medium. You don't have to read it and process the syntax, It just washes over you. It physically manifests this feeling of a world without a core meaning.
It beams a fractured reality directly into our brains, completely bypassing our logical, critical filters. For millions of viewers, cinema is what gives this terrifying worldview its legitimacy.
It creates a visceral sensory experience of the philosophical void. That is wild.
It is. But to really grasp how radical this postmodern hacking of our brains is, we have to contrast it with the baseline. We have to look at classic cinematic realism, which operated on a completely different set of moral and artistic rules.
I actually found this part of the notes fascinating, because before we had movies melting our brains with multiple overlapping hyper-realities, we had directors who basically just wanted to show life exactly as it was.
Yeah, a very humble approach to the art form.
Right. The notes bring up the early cinematic realists, pointing specifically to Cesare Zavattini, who wrote the screenplay for the Italian neo-realist masterpiece Bicycle Thieves in 1948, and the German film theorist Siegfried Kracauer.
Their approach to the camera is almost alien to how we think about film today.
Yeah.
They believe the camera had a profound moral responsibility.
The analogy that came to mind when I was reading their theories was a high-end security camera.
That's a great way to put it.
Thanks. I mean, the whole goal of classic cinematic realism, at least as they envisioned it, was to preserve the absolute illusion that the world on the screen had not been manipulated, touched, or editorialized by the artist.
They wanted an objective reflection of reality with the absolute minimum amount of interference.
Right, so the content, the raw, unvarnished human struggle, the dude on the streets, the natural light mattered infinitely more than flashy editing or special effects.
For thinkers like Kracauer, the camera was a humble recording device. Its sole job was to witness truth, not to manufacture it. If you manipulate the image, you are basically lying to the audience.
But human nature and art rarely stay stagnant, right?
No, they never do. As we move deeper into the 20th century, the text introduces the semiotic view of Pier Paolo Pasolini. He was this incredibly provocative Italian director and intellectual.
And he completely fractures that security camera model, doesn't he?
Completely. He didn't just see the camera as a passive recording device. He viewed cinema as a chapter in the general semiotics of reality.
Semiotics being the study of signs, symbols, and how meaning is created.
Yes. For Pasolini, cinema isn't just a window looking out at the world. It is a language constructed out of reality itself.
So the filmmaker takes the real, physical world and turns it into a system of signs to communicate something else entirely.
Exactly. It's the first major step away from humble observation and toward active manipulation. And this philosophical shift lays the absolute groundwork for the evolution into what our sources call hyper-realism.
Hyper-realism. It's one of those aesthetic buzzwords that gets thrown around to describe anything that looks cool, but the notes define it with terrifying specificity.
They really do. How did you interpret their definition?
Well, they describe it as an artistic movement that is trying to achieve an intensely realistic look, but it abandons the quest for actual truth. It's not about pointing a camera at a gritty street corner to document poverty anymore.
Right.
It's about creating an aesthetic that feels so sharp, so detailed, so sonically and visually immersive that it feels more real than real life.
Yes, that hyper-detailed quality is key.
And the notes point out that these films often defy traditional comforting story structures. Like maybe they jump into a narrative at a completely random point to disorient you. But ultimately, they use the tools of realism to blur the lines between fiction and reality, creating a synthesized hybrid.
That distinction is the hinge on which this whole deep dive turns. Classic realism wanted to gently capture reality. Hyper-realism aggressively wants to replace it.
Replace it, that is a strong word.
But it's accurate. It uses advanced editing techniques, impossible camera angles, and hyper-detailed sound design like hearing the microscopic crunch of gravel under a boot at deafening volumes to create a synthesized reality that completely overwhelms our natural senses.
Okay, let me stop you right there because this is where my brain starts to tie itself in knots.
Uh-oh. Go ahead.
If hyper-realism looks more real than real life, doesn't it fundamentally destroy reality? I mean, if I can go to a theater and experience a synthesized version of the world that is punchier, more emotionally resonant, and visually clearer than my actual life, haven't we severed our anchor to what is actually true?
You've just hit on the most terrifying conclusion of postmodern cinematic theory.
Oh, great.
Yes, the authentic reality is destroyed because the fake becomes the preferred baseline. And to understand the mechanics of how we got to a point where society allowed reality to be replaced so willingly, we have to look at the blueprint provided by the French sociologist and philosopher Jean Baudrillard.
Jean Baudrillard. If anyone listening has ever had a late-night crisis where they felt like the modern world is just a giant, inescapable simulation, Baudrillard is the guy who basically wrote the instruction manual for that panic attack.
Yeah, his work heavily influenced The Matrix, for instance.
Right. But his philosophy, particularly his essay Simulacra and Simulation, can be incredibly dense and academic. The sources focus on his 4 stages of the image. How do we break those 4 stages down into something we can actually visualize?
We need to use the simplest, most universal object we can imagine. Let's trace how human society moved from living in a concrete physical reality to living in a purely simulated one by looking at an apple.
An apple. Okay, I like this.
Yeah. Baudrillard wanted to chart the tragic life cycle of how an image or a sign relates to the real world.
Let's walk through the life cycle of the apple then. Stage 1.
Stage 1 is representation. In this stage, the image is a good, faithful reflection of a profound reality. It respects the original.
So we're talking about like a classic still life painting of an apple by a Renaissance master.
Exactly. The artist is striving to accurately capture the shape, the specific shade of red, the way the light hits the skin, and the essence of a real piece of fruit sitting on a wooden table. The image points directly and honestly to a tangible thing in the real world.
Okay, so the image is basically a mirror. It says, look at this real thing. I'm with you. What happens in stage 2?
Stage 2 is corruption or distortion. Here, the image starts to twist and denature that profound reality. It is still anchored to the real thing, but it's lying about the details to make it more appealing.
Give me an example of that with our apple.
Think of a modern commercial for an orchard or an influencer taking a photo of that apple for Instagram. They spray it with glycerin so it shines artificially. They run it through 10 different digital filters.
Right. They boost the saturation until it's a glowing, radioactive, flawless red.
Exactly. They smooth out all the natural blemishes. It is technically a picture of an apple, but it presents a twisted, unnatural, idealized version of reality that doesn't actually exist anywhere in nature.
It's a hyper-real apple. It's connected to truth, but it's a heavily, heavily edited truth.
You got it.
Which brings us to stage 3, where things start to get genuinely unsettling.
Stage 3 is masking absence. In this stage, the image acts as a disguise. It is covering up the fact that there is no profound reality underneath it anymore. It is pretending to be a faithful copy, but there is no original.
How does that work with our apple? I'm trying to picture that.
Think of a piece of bright green, intensely sour apple candy. It has a vague spherical shape that we culturally associate with an apple. The wrapper says apple in big letters. And it has an intense, recognizable green apple flavor.
Oh, I see where you're going.
Right. But that flavor is purely a chemical compound synthesized in a laboratory.
Yeah.
There is absolutely no real fruit, no orchard, no soil involved in the creation of that candy. The candy and its artificial flavor is an image that masks the absence of a real apple. It actively tricks your brain into associating it with nature, when in fact it is entirely synthetic. It's a sleight of hand.
I see that. It's a cover-up. The image exists solely to hide the void where the reality should be. And that finally leads us to Baudrillard's 4th stage, the terminal stage.
Stage 4 is the simulacra. In this stage, the image has completely severed all ties to any reality whatsoever. It is its own pure simulacrum. It is a copy without an original.
So it doesn't even bother pretending to refer to the real physical world anymore.
Exactly. In stage 4, the simulation becomes the reality.
So we've moved from a painting of an apple to a filtered photo of an apple to a chemical candy pretending to be an apple to what? Pure data. Like a digital apple in a video game that characters eat to regain health points, and we just accept that digital transaction as eating.
Precisely. It is a concept that references only other concepts. And here is where we tie Baudrillard directly back to our deep dive. The sources argue that the postmodern era we live in right now is essentially the era of the simulacra.
And modern cinema is the engine mass-producing these simulacra.
Exactly.
I mean, think about how massive blockbuster movies operate today. So much of postmodern cinema is just recycling, quoting, and remixing shots, dialogue, and tropes from older movies.
It's constant homage and reference.
Right. When a director today films a highly stylized, slow-motion shootout, they aren't going out and studying how a real gunfight looks or sounds in the physical world. Real gunfights are chaotic, brief, and incredibly uncinematic.
They don't look good on camera.
Not at all.
Yep.
Instead, the director is basing their scene on how a gunfight looked in a hyper-stylized movie from the 1990s, like The Matrix. And The Matrix based its shootouts on John Woo's Hong Kong action films from the 1980s. And John Woo based his aesthetic on Sam Peckinpah's westerns from the 1960s.
It is a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. Every generation degrades the connection to the original reality until there is no original reality left. It is just a cinematic language referencing other cinematic language.
But I want to challenge this a bit because Baudrillard's framework feels incredibly cynical. Isn't calling everything a simulacra just a depressing way to view modern art? Surely there are still directors out there trying to tell objective, grounded truths about the human condition.
It's a very fair pushback. And there are absolutely filmmakers striving for neorealism today. But Baudrillard isn't necessarily commenting on the intent of the artist. He's commenting on the environment in which the art is consumed.
The cultural ecosystem.
Exactly. Even if a director tries to tell an objective truth, that film is released into an ecosystem of pure simulacra. And eventually, these recycled cinematic images become our actual societal reality. They create a closed loop.
How so? Give me an example.
Because we start judging our real lives by the metrics of the simulacra. We judge the success of our real-world romances based on the highly engineered, artificial simulacra of romantic comedies.
Oh, that is so true.
Right. We judge real-world heroism and political action based on the simulacra of superhero movies. The hyper-real cinema doesn't reflect our world, becomes the blueprint for our world. We start trying to make our lives look like the movie, rather than the movie looking like our lives.
Which raises a monumental problem about agency. If the movie on the screen is a simulacrum, a totally fake reality constructed from other fake realities who is really in control when the lights go down in the theater.
That's the million-dollar question.
Is the movie programming us, feeding us this artificial green apple candy until we forget what fruit tastes like? Or are we, the viewers, actively shaping the movie and bending it to our own will?
And that profound question brings us to the ultimate philosophical showdown outlined in our sources. We have a battle for the control of your mind between two towering figures of Western philosophy, Immanuel Kant and Martin Heidegger.
This is the heavyweight bout of the deep dive. In the blue corner, representing the 18th century Enlightenment, we have Immanuel Kant. The notes summarize Kant's incredibly complex perspective on how we engage with art with a deceptively simple statement. They say, the viewer is what is important.
A very bold stance.
Kant argues that our cognition is directed at the object we are trying to grasp.
To understand Kant's revolution in philosophy, you have to understand that before him, people generally believed that our minds simply molded themselves to the objects in the world.
Like we were just passive clay.
Exactly. The world was the active agent, pressing its reality onto our passive brains. Kant flipped that completely upside down. He argued that the mind actively constructs the world we perceive.
So the object isn't the boss anymore.
No, the object doesn't force its reality onto you. Your internal cognitive faculties take the raw, chaotic data of the object and organize it into a reality you can actually understand.
The analogy I've always loved for Kant is imagining that every single human being is born wearing a pair of permanently tinted sunglasses, and we can never take them off.
That's a classic way to picture it.
Let's say your lenses are tinted blue. You look at a stark white wall, and you perceive it as blue. The wall itself isn't blue, but your mandatory biological and psychological mechanism for seeing makes it blue for you.
Yes.
When we apply this to cinema, the text calls these sunglasses our cultural baggage. Every single viewer drags a massive, invisible suitcase of baggage into the theater with them.
And what's in that suitcase?
Well, it contains their socioeconomic background, their religious beliefs, their specific childhood traumas, their political leanings, their gender, their entire worldview. And according to Kant, this baggage acts as the cognitive filter that dictates exactly how the cinematic text is read.
Under a strict Kantian framework, there is no such thing as a single objective movie playing on the screen. The movie itself is just a rapid sequence of light and sound waves. If there are 300 people sitting in the theater, there are 300 completely different, distinct movies playing simultaneously in their minds.
That is so wild to think about.
The viewer is an active partner. They are an essential collaborator in the creation of meaning. It is the viewer who actually constructs the reality of the film.
And I want to take a moment right here for a crucial impartiality check, because this concept is incredibly relevant to how we consume media today. Viewers bring vastly different, and in today's climate, often violently polarized cultural and political baggage to films.
Oh, without a doubt.
You could have a viewer with deeply progressive left-wing political views sitting right next to a viewer with deeply conservative right-wing political views. They are staring at the exact same screen, watching the exact same hyper-realistic political thriller.
And they will have two completely different experiences.
Exactly. One person walks out convinced the film is a scathing critique of corporate greed, and the other person walks out convinced it's a heroic tale of individual liberty against state overreach. The goal of this deep dive and our strict rule on this show is absolutely not to validate one specific cultural or political lens over another.
Right, that's not what we're here to do.
We aren't here to declare whose baggage is correct. We are simply pointing out that, according to Kant, this baggage, whatever it happens to be for you, is the unavoidable mechanism through which the film's reality is built. You cannot check your baggage at the concession stand.
You literally can't, because your baggage isn't just opinions. It is the very structure of your cognition, is how your brain processes reality.
Okay, so that gives us Kant's highly empowering subjective view of the active viewer. You are the architect of the meaning. But in the red corner, we have a devastating counter-argument from the 20th century, courtesy of the father of modern existentialism, Martin Heidegger.
Heidegger looks at Kant's empowered, active, baggage-carrying viewer who thinks they are in control, and he essentially says, you have no idea how trapped you are.
Heidegger is definitely a buzzkill in this scenario.
He really is. He brings a much heavier, far more deterministic framework to the table. According to the sources, Heidegger argues that understanding existence isn't just a matter of an individual's cognitive filters or personal opinions.
It's bigger than that.
Much bigger. Understanding existence operates through time, and specifically through the weight of Western history. For Heidegger, temporality, the inescapable nature of time and history, is the fundamental horizon for all human understanding.
Temporality, okay.
He uses the concept of Dasein, which roughly translates to being there. You don't exist in a vacuum. You are thrown into a specific historical world that existed long before you and will exist long after you.
I understand the theory, but how does that actually manifest for the guy sitting in row G eating Milk Duds? Like, how does Heidegger's view of history apply to a 2-hour movie?
It means that the text carries an immense objective power. Heidegger argues that a true work of art is an event of truth that belongs to a specific historical epoch. When you sit down to watch a film, you are not a free-floating consciousness imposing your personal whims onto a blank screen.
Okay.
You are physically and psychologically constrained by the historical, technological, and temporal nature of the artwork itself. The film carries the immense weight of the cultural history that produced it and the mechanical rhythm of its editing. When the film starts, it strips away your context and throws you into its own temporal flow.
So the physical mechanics of the movie, the pacing, the cuts, the swelling of the musical score, literally drag you into its rhythm. You can't experience the movie at your own pace. The movie dictates the pace of your reality for those 2 hours.
Exactly. Heidegger is arguing that there's almost no room for pure, untethered Kantian interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just make the movie mean whatever you want it to mean based on your personal baggage, because the movie is actively imposing a historical world upon you.
It creates a world and shoves you inside it.
To use Heideggerian terms, the film opens up a world, and as a viewer, your only choice is to step into that specific world. You are a subject to the text, not the master of it.
This is a massive, fundamental clash. Are we free or are we determined? Are you, the listener, freely interpreting a hyper-realistic film and bending it to your will, as Kant suggests? Or are you locked into a historical, temporal experience dictated by the oppressive medium of the film itself, as Heidegger warns?
If we synthesize these sources and connect them to the bigger picture of postmodernism, the answer is likely a violent, ongoing collision of both theories.
A collision? How does that work?
Well, hyper-real cinema utilizes Heidegger's absolute power of the medium. It uses the inescapable, overwhelming sensory reality of the images and the relentless forward momentum of the editing to bombard you. It traps you in its temporality.
Right, the sheer volume and speed of the images.
But because we know from Baudrillard that the postmodern film is a simulacrum, it has no core truth, it's just a hollow copy, your Kantian mind desperately tries to fill the void.
Ah, I see.
Your brain frantically organizes the sensory overload using your personal baggage. The tension between the film's overwhelming power to dictate reality and your mind's desperate compulsion to interpret it is exactly where the psychological manipulation of modern cinema happens.
Which brings us to a very practical, immediate problem for anyone who wants to actually understand the media they consume. Knowing that our minds are locked in this subconscious wrestling match with overwhelming, hyper-realistic, historically weighted films, how do we actually break down a movie?
It's tricky, but it's possible.
How do we peel back the shiny aesthetic layers to find out what it is actually doing to our subconscious?
Fortunately, our sources provide a phenomenal toolkit for exactly this kind of cinematic autopsy. It starts with a foundational philosophical question posed by the thinkers Daniel Lafrati and Yehuda Israeli. They ask a very simple, incredibly profound question. What is the reality existing beyond observed phenomena?
In non-academic terms, what is actually going on beneath the surface of the car explosions and the dialogue that I'm seeing on the screen?
Precisely. And to answer that, the text introduces the psychoanalytic approach of the famous and notoriously difficult French psychiatrist Jacques Lacan.
Lacan is notoriously dense.
He is, but his core idea here is very usable. Lacan believed that to understand a text, whether it's a dream, a book, or a movie, you cannot just look at the literal linear narrative. You have to look at it associatively. You have to map the hidden structure of the human psyche directly onto the structure of the film itself.
The text sets up a very clear dichotomy here based on Lacan's ideas. There is the conscious and the unconscious. In cinematic terms, the conscious is the manifest layer. It is what is explicitly, loudly shown on the screen.
Right. The stuff you literally see and hear.
It's the dialogue the characters speak, the car chases, the obvious plot points, the physical locations. But the unconscious is the latent or the hidden layer. It's the subtext, the recurring visual symbols, the silent associations that the film is making without ever saying them out loud. It's a psychological undercurrent.
And film theorist Sandra Mary takes this abstract psychoanalytic foundation and structures it into a highly practical model for film analysis. She identifies 3 distinct interacting layers of the cinematic text.
Oh, let's go through them because this is the framework we're going to use for the rest of the deep dive. Number 1, the narrative layer. This is the basic story. The sequence of causal events. Character A discovers a secret, travels to location B, and fights character C.
Very straightforward.
Number 2, the dramatic layer. This is the conflict. It's the emotional stakes, so the psychological tension between the characters, the internal obstacles they have to overcome.
Also relatively easy to spot.
And number 3, the symbolic layer. This is the deep meaning. These are the hidden psychological, philosophical, or political truths embedded in the visual imagery and the structure of the film itself.
So you have the story, the conflict, and the meaning. The manifest and the hidden.
I see the structure, but I have to push back here on behalf of every casual moviegoer on the planet.
Riff where?
If I go to the theater on a Friday night after an exhausting 50-hour work week, I am not pulling out a moleskin notebook to track the narrative, dramatic, and symbolic layers of the latest blockbuster movie. I am just trying to eat my popcorn, turn my brain off, and be entertained for 2 hours. It feels impossible to expect a normal viewer to actively process all 3 of these layers simultaneously.
I agree with you, and that raises an incredibly important point about the nature of hyper-real cinema. You don't have to process it consciously. In fact, the directors are relying on the fact that you won't.
Wait, what do you mean? They want us to miss the symbols.
They want the symbols to bypass your critical faculties. Think about the mechanics of a hyper-realistic film. It is meticulously designed to completely overwhelm your conscious mind.
Because it's so loud and fast.
Yes. The intense rapid-fire visuals, the deafening sound design, the relentless pacing, all of that feeds the narrative and dramatic layers directly into your conscious awareness at maximum volume. Your brain is expending all of its cognitive energy just trying to trap the explosions, the fast-paced dialogue, and the complex plot twists.
Right, I'm just trying to keep up.
Because your conscious mind is operating at maximum capacity, your logical critical defenses drop. And while your conscious mind is completely distracted by the shiny spectacle of the manifest layer, the symbolic layer slips right past the gates. It directly targets your unconscious mind, planting associations, fears, and ideologies without you ever realizing it.
Oh, wow. It's a Trojan horse mechanism.
That's exactly what it is.
The hyper-real aesthetic, the massive budget spectacle that is the giant wooden horse. And the symbolic meaning, the postmodern void, the simulacra, the ideological baggage, is the army hiding inside, infiltrating your subconscious while you're busy enjoying the ride and eating your popcorn.
That is the perfect analogy, which is why we need to move from abstract theory to concrete practice. We need to look at specific case studies from the sources to see exactly how these master architects of cinema construct these Trojan horses and what kind of armies they're sneaking into our minds.
Yes. Let's take all this incredibly heavy theory, Baudrillard's simulacra, Kant's viewer baggage, Heideggerian temporality, and Lacan's psychoanalytic layers, and apply it to actual art. The sources provide some wild, fascinating comparisons to illustrate this.
They really do. Where should we start?
Let's start with a massive leap across time. The text compares a painting from the year 1434, Jan van Eyck's famous work, the Arnolfini Portrait, with the 2017 hyperkinetic postmodern action film Atomic Blonde, directed by David Leitch.
On the surface, it seems like an absurd, almost comical comparison. A 15th century oil painting and a neon-soaked 21st century spy thriller. But it perfectly, systematically illustrates the philosophical shift from classic realism to postmodern hyper-realism.
So let's look at the Arnolfini Portrait. For anyone who hasn't seen it, it's a painting of a wealthy Italian merchant and his wife standing in a seemingly ordinary room.
It's beautiful.
It is widely considered a masterpiece of early Northern Renaissance realism. Van Eyck painted it with such microscopic photographic detail, the texture of the fur on their coats, the light reflecting off a brass chandelier, that it almost feels like a modern snapshot. It is the ultimate attempt at capturing objective reality.
But Van Eyck wasn't just recording a room like a security camera. His realism is densely packed with hidden symbols, communicating deep, objective meaning to the viewer.
Give me some examples of the symbols.
For example, there is a little dog at their feet, which symbolizes fidelity. There is a single lit candle in the chandelier during the daytime, which symbolizes the all-seeing presence of God. They have removed their shoes, which indicates they are standing on holy ground, likely observing a sacred marriage contract.
So, if we use Sandra Mary's 3 layers to analyze the painting, the narrative layer is simply a couple standing in a room. The dramatic layer might be the tension of their social standing or the solemnity of their marriage vow, but the symbolic layer is screaming with profound objective meaning.
Exactly.
Every meticulous brushstroke points upward to faith, to religion, to an absolute unifying truth. It is the ultimate meta-narrative.
Right. The realism serves to reinforce the absolute truth. Now, fast forward nearly 6 centuries to Atomic Blonde. This is a hyper-stylized, neon-drenched, incredibly brutal spy film set in Berlin right at the end of the Cold War, just as the wall is coming down.
It's a very intense movie.
Very. It uses dynamic, impossible camera work, an unrelenting soundtrack of pulsing 80s pop music, and incredibly visceral, hyper-realistic fight choreography.
The fight scenes in that movie are exhausting to watch. You feel every punch. It is the definition of sensory overload. But the text argues that, just like Van Eyck, Atomic Blonde is using its hyper-realistic visual techniques to embed symbols into the viewer's unconscious.
It absolutely does. But the philosophical difference is what those symbols point to. Van Eyck's symbols pointed up toward a divine, objective reality. The symbols in Atomic Blonde, the reflection of bright pink neon lights and dark puddles of blood, the upbeat pop songs playing incongruously over scenes of brutal torture, the literal maze-like structure of a divided, collapsing city, they don't point to faith.
No, definitely not.
They don't point to an absolute moral truth.
What do they point to then? How does a pop song playing over a fight scene create meaning?
It creates cognitive dissonance, which points to the void. When you hear 99 Luftballons while a character is bleeding to death, the film is mocking the idea of meaning. It points to chaos, to the total breakdown of political and moral structures.
It points to the simulacra.
Exactly. The film is a hyper-realistic, beautiful shell, masking the terrifying absence of any real moral truth in the Cold War espionage world. It's exactly Baudrillard's 3rd and 4th stages. It looks intensely real, but it's signifying nothing but its own artificiality and the collapse of the meta-narrative.
That is brilliant. The hyperrealism isn't there to show us the truth of espionage. It's there to distract us from the fact that there is no truth left. It's a perfect postmodern Trojan horse.
It really is.
Let's look at another set of master architects from the sources. The notes bring up a fascinating comparison between Christopher Nolan's 2010 mind-bending heist film Inception and Robert Zemeckis' 1997 sci-fi drama Contact. Both of these directors are absolute masters at shaming cinematic hyperreality, but they deploy it to explore completely different philosophical ends.
These are great examples.
Let's start with Zemeckis and Contact.
Contact is a brilliant exploration of subjective reality and faith. Jodie Foster plays Dr. Ellie Arroway, a fiercely rational, agnostic scientist who finally achieves her life's work. She travels through a mathematically constructed wormhole to meet an advanced alien intelligence.
Such a great setup.
But when she arrives at the center of the galaxy, the climax of the film subverts all of our sci-fi expectations. She doesn't find a sprawling, metallic alien city or terrifying creatures. She finds herself standing in a hyper-realistic, brightly lit, beautiful beach from her childhood in Pensacola, Florida. And the alien intelligence takes the exact physical form of her deceased, beloved father.
When I reread the notes on this scene, I realized this is Kant's philosophy brought to life on screen.
Absolutely. It is the ultimate manifestation of Kantian cognition. The alien intelligence literally explains to her that they downloaded her memories, her thoughts, and her cultural baggage to construct this specific reality.
So they used her baggage as the building block.
Yes. They did it to make the incomprehensible experience of meeting a godlike intelligence easier for her human brain to process. Zemeckis uses hyper-realism to visually manifest the protagonist's internal Kantian lenses. Her internal mind literally shapes the external world she interacts with.
The film brilliantly blurs the lines between objective reality, the fact that she's billions of light years across the universe, and subjective fiction, the fact that she feels like she is talking to her dad on a beach in Florida.
Exactly.
Zemeckis uses the hyper-real aesthetic to show us how our internal baggage constructs our external reality. It's almost a comforting view of subjectivity. But then we have Christopher Nolan and Inception. If Contact explores Kant's theory with awe, Inception weaponizes it.
That's a great way to put it. Inception takes Kant's abstract idea of the mind actively creating the object and turns it into a literal physical heist mechanic. The main characters in the film, led by Leonardo DiCaprio, are literally called architects.
Right.
Their job is to design hyper-realistic dream environments, cities, hotels, snow fortresses that become completely indistinguishable from waking reality.
Right. They construct the narrative and dramatic layers of a fake world, and they populate it with such hyper-realistic detail. The feeling of the carpet, the weather, the physics, that the target's unconscious mind completely accepts it as real. They are literally building Baudrillard's simulacra for a living.
And what makes Inception a masterpiece of postmodern cinema is that Nolan is doing to the audience exactly what the characters are doing to their targets. Nolan himself is the architect. He builds a multi-layered, intensely hyper-realistic cinematic dreamscape for us.
And he totally leaves us hanging at the end.
He does. He gives us the spinning top at the end of the film, a symbol that is supposed to help the main character distinguish between reality and the dream. But Nolan cuts to black before the top falls or keeps spinning. He never gives us an objective answer.
Which is incredibly frustrating for a viewer looking for a meta-narrative. We want to know the truth.
But philosophically, it's perfect. By denying us the objective truth, Nolan traps the viewer inside the simulacrum. He forces us to realize that our own minds, our own desires for a happy or tragic ending, are actively constructing the reality of the film's conclusion. He forces us to be Kantian active viewers, whether we want to be or not.
It's a perfect closed loop of manipulation and creation. But if we want to talk about the ultimate cinematic manifestation of everything we've discussed today, the simulacra, the death of history, the active viewer, we have to talk about the final case study in our sources. The 2011 sci-fi thriller Source Code, directed by Duncan Jones.
I'm so glad we are ending on Source Code. It is the textbook definition of postmodern cinematic theory brought to terrifying life. It perfectly illustrates both Baudrillard's concept of the total simulacra and Heidegger's complex theories on time and historicity.
Let's break down the narrative layer so everyone is on the same page. Jake Gyllenhaal plays a military helicopter pilot who suddenly wakes up on a commuter train heading into Chicago. He is in another man's body.
It's such a disorienting opening.
It is. He has exactly 8 minutes to figure out what is happening before a massive bomb goes off, killing everyone on the train. He dies in the agonizing explosion and then immediately wakes up in a cold, dark military pod. Scientists tell him he is part of an experimental program called the Source Code.
And this is where the simulacra comes in.
Right. They have collected the residual memories from the brains of the dead passengers, and they have stitched them together to create a digital recreation of the final 8 minutes before the explosion. His consciousness is being repeatedly projected into this simulation. He has to keep going back into this 8-minute loop, dying over and over again to find the bomber before a second attack happens in the real world.
So immediately, structurally, we are operating in Baudrillard's fourth stage. The reality he is experiencing on that train has no original. It is a digital composite, a Frankenstein simulation built from fragmented, subjective data. It's a copy of a moment that no longer physically exists. The train on the screen is pure simulacrum.
And he repeats it over and over and over. The repetition itself creates its own terrifying reality.
And this is exactly where Heidegger's concept of temporality comes in, and how the film shatters it. Heidegger argued that our understanding of our own existence is inextricably tied to our forward momentum through time, moving constantly toward our own inevitable death.
Our timeline gives us meaning.
Yes, our history gives us context, and our impending death gives us meaning. But in source code, that temporal momentum is completely shattered. Time is broken. The hero is experiencing and actively intervening in past moments repeatedly. The historical timeline is erased and replaced by a cyclical, simulated loop. He isn't moving toward death. He's experiencing death as a reset button.
Heidegger's world has been reduced to an 8-minute, replayable video game level. It is the ultimate manifestation of the postmodern condition. The protagonist is completely trapped in a reality built entirely of recycled, simulated, heavily edited moments. The boundary between the virtual simulation and actual reality is completely erased.
It's completely gone.
And the most shocking part of the film is the ending, where the simulation becomes so robust and his Kantian will within the simulation is so strong that the simulation actually becomes the new primary reality. He survives the explosion within the simulation and just keeps living in the alternate timeline.
It's a profound, almost disturbing conclusion. It shows us that in a world dominated by hyper-real simulacra, the origin, the truth, simply doesn't matter anymore. If the copy is convincing enough, if the hyper-realism is immersive enough, the copy literally becomes the truth. The simulation wins.
So we've covered a massive, frankly exhausting amount of philosophical ground today. For the listener sitting in their car or out on a run whose head is spinning from Kant, Heidegger, and Baudrillard, what does this all mean for them?
If we synthesize this entire journey, we can see a dramatic, terrifying evolution of how we view our world and the media we consume. We move from the classic realist era, where humble cameras tried to objectively record an absolute truth, to the postmodern era, where filmmakers use the sensory overload of hyper-realism to actively create and manipulate our reality.
We really went from witnesses to creators.
We did. We learned that if you look through the lens of Immanuel Kant, your personal worldview, your unique baggage, is the crucial key to unlocking any film. You are an active collaborator building the reality on the screen. But if you listen to Martin Heidegger, we are sternly reminded of the inescapable, deterministic grip of the medium itself, shaping our perceptions and trapping us in its timeline before we even realize what's happening.
And by understanding Baudrillard's concept of the simulacra, a copy without an original, and Jacques Lacan's psychoanalytic layers, we finally have the toolkit to see how these movies operate. We understand the Trojan horse.
We can see the army inside.
Right. We know that they distract our conscious minds with loud, brilliant spectacle while quietly rewriting our unconscious understanding of what is real and what is meaningful.
Which means you, the listener, no longer have the luxury of being just a passive consumer sitting in a dark room. Once you see the strings pulling the puppets, you can't unsee them. You become an active, critical participant in reality making.
You have to be.
The next time you watch a hyper-realistic film, you will be able to recognize when it's feeding you an artificial candy apple instead of the real thing. It demands a much higher level of critical engagement with the media we allow into our minds.
It absolutely does. It requires us to keep our guard up. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering thought to mull over as you go about your day. We've established that postmodern cinema trains our brains to accept the simulacra, a heavily edited, hyper-realistic copy, without an original as perfectly, undeniably real. But what happens when we apply that exact same mechanism to our own internal lives?
Oh, that's a heavy thought.
Think about your most cherished memories, the ones you hold on to the tightest. Are the memories you have of your childhood actually yours? Or have they been slowly rewritten, directed, and edited over the years by the hyper-realistic media you've consumed your whole life? Do you remember the actual messy, objective moment? Or do you remember a polished cinematic trope that feels like it should belong there?
Did the sunset really look like that, or did your brain apply a cinematic color grade to it?
Exactly. Next time you look back at your past, take a close look at the narrative, the drama, and the symbols, and ask yourself, are you remembering the original or just a really convincing sequel?